Hello student, now we will see the next concept in the inheritance, the use of the final keyword in the inheritance. So we have already seen the final keyword. What is a final? Final means complete. So you can use the final keyword to the variables, you can use the final keyword to the methods, you can use the final keyword to the classes. So now the first thing is, whenever we want the variable should be like a constant. So in the C++ we have used the const keyword. So whenever we want to define the constant variable, in the same way in the Java you can define a variable called as a final, and the final variables are nothing but what? The constant variables. So you can initialize it while declaring it, or you can define, or you can initialize it in the constructor of the parent class. So this is called as final variable. So the final variables are the constant variables. If you are trying to modify the value of the final variable, you will get the compile time error. So these are the final variables. So we have defined the final variable. So this is the first use. The next use it, the instance method I can define as what? The final method. This is right now the method is an instance method, and I can add the final modifier to my method. Whenever I will define any method as a final method, means what? It is a complete method. So what is the use of this? So whenever I will use the inheritance, I will derive the child class, and in the child class, if I am overriding the method which I have defined as a final in my parent class, so final means complete method. Your child should not re-implement that method. If the child class tries to re-implement that method, it will give you the compile time error. So you can see that we can run the code, and here you can see that the child cannot override this method because it is a final. So the final method you cannot override in the child class. So this is a second use. The first use it, you can create a constant variables. So that is the first use. Only the difference in the constant and the final is, in the you can only declare it, and in the parent you can give the definition. But in the C++, the constant variable should be what? The declare it, define it whenever it will, like this. I can declare or I can define it afterwards. Okay, so this is also what? The allowed. Okay, so this is also allowed. So whenever you are creating the variable, that time you can define it, or in the constructor you can define that particular final variable. So, and in the constant, in the C++, in the const keyword, whenever you are defining a const variable, you have to give the value at the time of the declaration itself, but that is not a case in the final variable. So this is only the difference between the final and the const. So the first use it to declare the final variable, second use it to define the final methods. So whenever I will define the final method, you cannot override that method. So if I will remove this, so you can see that if I will remove this, so my code is going to work fine. No problem, I will not get any compile time error. Okay, so in this way, this is the second use of what? The final keyword. So I have written it, using final prevent overriding. So disallow a method from being overridden. Sometimes it improves the performance and uses the early binding. As you can see that if we are not overriding, so whenever I will call this particular method, it will use the early binding or the static time binding, which is obviously going to improve the performance. So that is the thing. So the next is, whenever we want to prevent the inheritance, suppose I have defined one class and you want no class should inherit that particular class. So whenever you want to prevent the inheritance, what we have to do is, we have to declare that class as a final class. So I will declare the class as a final class, and whenever I will declare the class final and I will use the inheritance relationship, I will get the compile time error. It will say that the final class cannot be inherited. So it is because the final class means what? It is a complete class, and you don't want anyone should re-implement any of these methods, because if you will define the final class implicitly, all instance method of this class becomes the final methods. So your child class is not going to what the override that method. So this is a second use of what the final keyword. So the prevent class being inherited. Declaring a class as a final implicitly declare all of its method as a final. Use for the complete implemented class. Illegal to declare the both final and the abstract. If I will say that my class is final as well as abstract, both are what the opposite keywords. So the abstract is incomplete class and final means complete class, and whenever I will give like this, so it will see that you cannot use these two modifiers at a time. So it is a illegal combination of what the modifiers. So you cannot declare the both final and the abstract at a time.